Good morning, seniors. Sorry that I am not in class today, but of course, the show goes on, and I want to make sure that we continue with class. So we're going to go through the lecture on how we get our federal judges and justices. Please make sure that you're holding your questions till the end of the slide. Who's ever up at the computer will pause at the end of each slide for people to ask quick clarifying questions, catch anything you missed. But as always, of course, please write down clarifying questions or leave blank spots where you don't get something, and we will have plenty of time on Monday in discussion section to answer your clarifying questions. So let's get started. Today's big idea. Though federal judges and justices serve in a nonpartisan and ideally non-political role, their selection process is highly political. Key words here is nonpartisan, meaning, many of you asked about this on the test, nonpartisan. Political party aren't supposed to be involved. Our judges, federal judges, political party doesn't matter. They don't get listed with their political party after their name. And ideally, non-political. Hopefully when judges are deciding legal disputes on the bench, they're not thinking about the political ramifications. They're simply interpreting the law in a fair and equitable way. So again, though federal judges and justices serve in a nonpartisan, no political party, and ideally non-political role, their selection process is still highly political. So, you want to be a judge or justice. What's the steps? So, first, we need to think about the importance of, before the president nominates someone for a federal judgeship or to be a justice of the Supreme Court, realize how these people are extremely important. We don't think about them in our day-to-day lives, but they make some really big decisions that affect our lives as a whole and some people's lives in an extremely radical way. So, judges. The judges that sit on our federal courts are settling significant criminal and civil cases on a daily basis. So if you're going to, and BP had to settle a huge case with the oil spill worth billions of dollars. Criminal cases involving violent crimes, gang violence, mob activity. Big criminal and civil cases get decided by judges. There also, let's not forget that the death penalty is still legal, a still legal punishment for breaking federal law. So they hear cases and appeals on cases that involve the death penalty. So if somebody does a crime that carries the death penalty as a possible punishment, the judges that get nominated by the president ultimately end up making a decision of, does that appeal stand? Does that person convicted by a jury of their peers to be sentenced to death actually have to be put to death? Federal judges make that call. Big stuff. Also, do not forget, they serve for life. They can serve as long as the Constitution says life or quote-unquote good behavior. Good behavior, vague thing, as long as they don't do anything ridiculous. The judge gets to stay on the bench. So these people that get chosen stay there for the rest of their lives. And that's all much longer than any senator, much longer than any member of the House, and definitely much longer than any president. Next, the justices of the Supreme Court. Real quick, judges are any judge on any court besides the Supreme Court. If you're one of the 9 people that are members of the Supreme Court, you are called a justice. Pretty cool law. So, the justices, they are the final say on the largest social and political issues in our country. They're the final say. What they decide about how they interpret the Constitution to deal with things like same-sex marriage, political donation law, abortion. Those 9 justices are the final say. What they say goes. The only way to get around what they say, if Congress or the president doesn't like it, is to rewrite the law or to get the Constitution amended. Very difficult things. The final say. Also, they serve for life. If the president is able to nominate someone to the Supreme Court, he's going to have someone with similar opinions to him on the court, likely for the next 20 to 30 years, long after he's gone. Please make sure you pause for questions. So what's the actual process for nominating judges and justices? Let's start first with justices. Again, justices, this is specific to the Supreme Court. Step 1, the president, and of course his aides, because he's very busy, create a short list of nominees. So people they think would be good at the job, probably have similar opinions to the president, and have a chance of being approved by the Senate. He then approaches those nominees. Because it's the Supreme Court, the president in person asks these people to serve on the Supreme Court if they are willing to be nominated. It's not like my aide, the secretary, your assistant goes and asks the person. No, you get invited to the Oval Office and asked if you're willing to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. A huge honor. Then the president's aides, if the likely nominee wants to actually go through the process, the president aides vet this possible nominee. I want to make sure you guys know how to use the word vet. Nothing to do with veterinary medicine, has nothing to do with animals. To vet means to go deeply into somebody's background and make sure that they're actually qualified for something. To check for skeletons in their closet. Right? They're about to go through a confirmation hearing, a televised hearing by the Senate Judiciary Committee to decide. The Senate Judiciary Committee will decide if that person is good enough. They will ask any and all questions pertaining to should this person be a Supreme Court justice, serve for the rest of their life being the final say on the laws of the United States. So they ask them tons of questions, investigate everything about the person, see if there's any skeletons in the closet, and if anything shows up, sometimes they'll then say to the person, we don't think you're going to actually pass the hearing, so we're going to find somebody else. All right. Next step, confirmation, as I said, by the Senate Judiciary Committee. As the Constitution says, the president gets to nominate, but they have to be confirmed by the Senate. The Senate Judiciary Committee, judiciary branch, right, is the one that then actually holds the hearing. What they'll ask them a wide range of questions involving controversial issues right now to feel out, all right, where does this person stand on unanswered legal questions? So right now in our time, there's still the unanswered legal questions that there's strong debate within the people about. As I said earlier, about donations to campaigns, should there be a cap on donations to campaigns, the beliefs about same-sex marriage, the beliefs about affirmative action, beliefs about a woman's right to an abortion. So they ask them questions about that. They'll also ask them other questions about how they are not influenced by other people, or how do they influence by other people? Do they think their background will play in any role on how they will rule in the court? Because once the Senate Judiciary Committee says the go, they'll likely pass the Senate. That person is on the bench for a long time. So they want to make sure that person is actually going to be fair and balanced and equitable in how they deliver the law. Next step, as I said, vote by the entire Senate. Significance. I'll say this a few times. Significance of this process is extremely detail-driven, making sure that this nominee is extremely qualified. It's also a huge spotlight on this person. On the day-to-day basis, we don't think about judges, but when you're nominated by the Supreme Court, it is the big news story throughout the entire process. It is a huge deal. It only happens every 5 to 10 years. It is a big deal. This person becomes part in the national spotlight for a few weeks, so it's not something people take lightly. The process for judges is a little bit different. Key thing here, how it's different, is something called senatorial courtesy. The president is obviously very busy, and the district judges and the circuit court judges, there's more of those, so the president doesn't always bother himself with nominating those individuals. He's, of course, part of the process, but the initial choosing of who the list is and the vetting is usually actually done by the senators. So senatorial courtesy, what it is. The president will allow the senators for the state that has the open judgeship, that has the open seat for a judge, to say who they would like it to be. So, example, if there's an open seat for a federal judge in Illinois, President Obama will turn to Senator Durbin of his own party, and also probably will ask Senator Kirk, a Republican, who do they think would be best suited to be the next federal judge in Illinois. Why do this? 2 reasons. 1, it's more efficient. The president doesn't have to get involved in every little piece of the federal court system. 2nd reason, the senators know their state best. So it actually ends up being a pretty quality person. The senators know who's going to be best for the position so they can quickly make the list. So the why, again, more efficient. Senators likely are actually going to know their state better. Justice with the Supreme Court Justice. There's a confirmation hearing by the Senate Judiciary Committee, not televised because it's not for the entire country. That judge is going to be in a specific region of the country. There's a vote by the entire Senate. Significance of this one. Senate has a bigger role and a more leading role in selection of judges, but there is still checks and balances between the two branches on the judicial branch. I'll say that again. So again, the significance, the president has a small role, the Senate has a bigger leading role, but there is still checks and balances by both branches on the third branch, the judicial branch. So, who are our judges and justices? Should their background matter? Should the person's experiences be taken into consideration before they're given this really important job to decide legal disputes for the rest of their life? Should it matter? Right? We're a diverse country, yes or no? So, quick sides, please make sure you can argue both sides of this point. If you have clarifying questions, again, please write them down. So, quickly, I'm going to argue no. Background should matter. Judges are nonpartisan, and their purpose is equality. Should judge every case based on the letter of the law. It shouldn't matter who they are. If they're a person who is qualified, then they should be able to read the law, make the same decision as anybody else that's intelligent enough to read the law, and the same every single time. Background shouldn't be a consideration because they're just supposed to be following the letter of the law, kind of doing a clerical job. Read it, decide what the line is, based on all the facts, make the decision. Doesn't sound like background should matter. Other side of it, yes, background matter. When nominating judges, we should be considering what their demographic background is. So no matter how disciplined your brain is, no matter how good you are just looking at the facts, you're never actually going to completely look at the facts. Your experiences, where you grew up, what you saw when you were growing up, the education experiences, the people you've met, the struggles you've had in your life, the successes you've had in your life, color your judgment and your life philosophy. What's the line between what the government should and should not be doing? What actually is a reasonable level of privacy for a person to have? Right? The law is not always clear, and when somebody's having to decide what the line is in that gray area, their life experiences, different people are going to draw that line differently. Right? Example, if we were to ask the 6 people in the room right now, what's the role of government? Right? There's still going to be a wide range of answers, even though we're all from the same part of the same city. Think about the range of the United States. So I generally side on yes. You should consider the background because you want to have a balanced court to make sure that all the different life experiences and life philosophies are there, being part of the process of defining the line in the vague parts of our laws. Go ahead and pause for people to write. So real quick, just want to put a picture up here. These are the 9 justices of the Supreme Court. This is the Supreme Court. Don't they all look happy? Just wanted to point out who they are so we can see them. And I wanted to point out a few key figures. So we have got John Roberts in the center. He's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Just also want to point out, so this is Clarence Thomas and Antonin Scalia. They were the ones that we watched in the Daily Show clip yesterday. We have Justice Ginsburg. She was in the news. She's well over the age of 80 at this point. Still very sharp in the brain, but said some things and kind of does things because she doesn't really care what others think. Still very good at her job, but you should look up what she did around the State of the Union this past year. We've got Sotomayor, first Hispanic on the Supreme Court. Justice Breyer. Justice Kennedy. Justice Kagan. And finally, Justice Alito. We'll talk about who's more conservative, who's more liberal amongst these groups on Monday in discussion section, but just want to start getting the names in your head. Right? Obviously, looking at them all, some trends. They all look pretty old, right? There's not a lot of racial diversity. And yeah, also, fun fact we'll see tomorrow on Monday, that they all went to only 2 law schools. All 9 of these people went to the same 2 law schools. All right. Who actually ends up getting nominated? So I just want us to know some trends. Just like we talked about when we were looking at Congress, the demographic breakdown of Congress. We briefly talked about the demographic breakdown of the presidency. Not that complicated. All bunch of older white guys. Obama, first black guy, right? And President Kennedy, the only Catholic. Everybody else was Protestant. So what's the breakdown of diversity of the courts? Again, I generally believe that we want a diverse court because they're making these complicated decisions. We want all life experiences and life philosophies to be represented. So take a moment to look at the graph, or the picture, sorry. There's currently 35 judges that are in the process of awaiting Senate confirmation. There's 18 men, 17 women. Good job, President Obama. Fairly gender balanced. Still, majority of them are white. But again, right now, this country's still majority white. There's a number of them that are openly gay. We've got Asian, Hispanics, blacks. But some of them are the first of their kind. So we have the first openly gay black man currently nominated for a judgeship, a federal judgeship. You can see the other firsts up here. So President Obama is obviously trying to diversify the court. But let's look down at past confirmation just over the past 3 presidents. So Bill Clinton, let's look over at Bill Clinton. So he was a Democrat, right? But even still, 15, 20 years ago, 70% of the people that got nominated to be a federal judge were men. 73% were white. Right? Only 1% were Asian, 19% black, 6% Hispanic. That does not mirror the demographics of the country. Right? President Bush wasn't much better. He was actually quite worse. In terms of diversity of judgeships, President Obama, actually one of his campaign promises in 2008 was that he would try to diversify the bench, as he calls it, diversify the judges of the United States. So, what do you need to have in your notes right now? Historically speaking, whites and men have been overrepresented as judges in the United States. Shocking, I know. But President Obama has made a point to try to diversify the bench, but not completely successful, but he's working towards it. All right. I'd like to go through a case study about the whole thing we've gone through so far about who gets picked to be a judge, what's the process to be a judge or justice of the Supreme Court, and what does that actually mean for how the courts makes decisions. So we're going to use Justice Clarence Thomas. Okay. So Justice Clarence Thomas, background. He used to be a lawyer. He was a longtime federal judge, so he has experience as a judge, so very qualified background to be making these decisions. Race, he's black. Political ideology, he is quite conservative. Right? So Clarence Thomas is quite conservative. Not shockingly, he was nominated by George H.W. Bush, the George Bush that was president before Clinton, not after. Nominated by President George W. Bush. Why did Bush nominate him? Well, Justice Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American justice of the Supreme Court, was no longer on the court. So he needed to nominate someone. Some people called it the black seat, right? Wanted to make sure that there was always at least one African-American on the Supreme Court. So Thurgood Marshall no longer on the court. They felt they needed to replace that same person, not with another white male, but instead replaced him with Thurgood Marshall with a black male. But Bush wanted to have the political balance of the court tipping his direction. Thurgood Marshall was a little bit more liberal, so he replaced, yes, preserving the racial balance of the court, but actually tried to tip the political balance towards his conservative point of view. Right? Again, Bush found a conservative black judge to replace a slightly more liberal black judge because he knew he wasn't going to be president forever. But Clarence Thomas, 25 years later, is still on this court, adding a conservative viewpoint to decisions. Also, the reason that I'm bringing up Clarence Thomas is that he had a rough confirmation hearing. Many times it's not the most fascinating things, but it's in the news a lot. His confirmation hearing actually lasted a long time. So Democrats didn't necessarily want him to be the one that got confirmed. They wanted a more liberal person on the court because they were worried the decisions that if the court was majority conservative, that the laws and constitution would be paid attention to in a more conservative way, ruled in a more conservative way. So they found a skeleton in his closet. They found a woman that he'd worked with, a federal lawyer named Anita Hill, that said that she had been sexually harassed with him many years before he had been nominated for it. They found something embarrassing in his past and drug it out during the Senate confirmation hearing. She was called to testify and became this whole drama. Did that have anything to do with his ability to be a judge? Most likely not, but the Democrats wanted to embarrass him so that there was a less likely chance that he would be confirmed because they wanted to watch the balance of the court, just as President Bush was trying to get the balance of the court to a conservative point of view. The confirmation hearing is highly contested because the decision that the Senate makes, the President makes about who the new justice is going to be, echoes for the next 20 to 30 years because that person is making decisions. As a justice, just a fun fact about Clarence Thomas as a justice, he's asked, I believe, a total of 3 questions so far in his 25 years on the bench during the questioning that happens during the hearing of a case at the Supreme Court. That doesn't mean he's not paying attention, doesn't mean he's not engaged, but he is sometimes called the silent justice. He doesn't like to ask questions. He's sitting there thinking and listening, does a lot of reading. He still writes his opinions as part of the process, as we'll talk about later, but he's just known as a very silent justice. He will rarely ask a question. Finally, our reflection question. Should all members of the Supreme Court have experience as a judge before being selected to be a justice? Do you have to have been a judge before you can be a member of the Supreme Court? If yes, explain why you think that is a necessary requirement. If no, what experience is necessary, if any? What are the qualifications? What does make someone a good candidate to be a member of the Supreme Court? Please spend time doing a quality job answering these questions. We will go over them on Monday in class. When you're done, you're welcome to get ahead on your reading. Again, any clarifying questions, you can ask the people around you as you work, or ask them of me during the discussion section on Monday. Thank you. Have a great weekend.